A packed flight. A woman sees a black man in a tailored suit, acting suspicious. She decides he's a threat. She calls security, demanding the crew divert the plane, convinced she's a hero. But she missed one small detail, tucked inside the man's jacket. By the time he revealed his badge, it wasn't just her flight that was ruined. It was her entire life. This isn't just a story of profiling. This is a story of how one woman's prejudice set a trap, and she was the only one who walked into it. The air in JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the smell of burnt coffee, industrial cleaner, and the anxious sweat of 1,000 people running late. It was the 6 p.m. bottleneck. Gate A12, designated for transatlantic air flight 117 to London Heathrow, was a microcosm of organized chaos. Passengers in various states of dress and distress jockeyed for position, pretending not to listen to the gate agent's monotone boarding announcements. Seated alone, slightly apart from the crowd, was Marcus Thorne. To the casual observer, he was just another businessman. His suit was a deep charcoal grey, custom-tailored, but it bore the weary creases of a man who had been in it for over 30 hours. His face, sharp and intelligent, was dominated by eyes that were currently scanning the crowd with a practiced, almost unnerving stillness. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was observing everyone. In his lap, he balanced a high-end, encrypted smartphone, his thumb occasionally swiping through what looked like dense financial reports. He was, in fact, suspicious, but not in the way the world would soon assume. Marcus Thorne was a senior special agent for the FBI, white-collar crime division. He was tired, he was wired on caffeine, and he was at the tail end of an 18-month investigation. His target was currently seated at the terminal bar, 30 yards away, sipping an overpriced glass of bourbon. The target was Julian Finch, a man who looked like a harmless, silver-haired accountant. Finch was, in reality, the primary courier for the Salviati Financial Syndicate, an organization that had successfully laundered over $400 million in stolen pension funds. Finch was on his way to London to liquidate the final assets. Marcus's job was simple: observe Finch, remain undetected, and ensure he met the Metropolitan Police's tactical team upon landing. No arrest on US soil. The trap had to be sprung in the UK to capture the entire network. Boarding for first class, rows 1 through 4, the agent chirped. Marcus stood, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. He picked up his 2 carry-ons, a soft-sided leather briefcase and a black, heavy-duty Pelican case that looked like it could survive re-entry. It was the Pelican case that drew the first stare. "Richard, look at that!" A woman's voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the din. Marcus didn't turn. He didn't need to. He'd already catalogued her. Caroline Hedges, 50s, blonde, brittle hair. Her outfit was a coordinated beige cashmere travel set that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment. Her wrist was heavy with clacking gold bracelets. She was traveling with her husband, Richard, a man who looked perpetually apologetic, holding 2 boarding passes. "What is that man doing with a case like that in first class?" Caroline whispered, loud enough for half the gate to hear. "It looks industrial. And he—" Her gaze raked over Marcus. It was a look he knew well. It was a look that questioned his very presence in the priority boarding line. "He's probably in a band," Richard mumbled, desperate to avoid a scene. "Carrying equipment." "He doesn't look like he's in a band," Caroline sniffed, her prejudice clear. "He looks shifty. Why is he staring at everyone?" Marcus, for his part, was staring at Julian Finch, who was now settling his bar tab and heading for the gate. Marcus kept his distance, allowing 3 other passengers to get between him and his target. He stepped up to the podium, handed his passport and boarding pass to the agent. Mr. Thorne. 2B. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you." He walked down the jet bridge. He could feel Caroline Hedges's eyes on his back. He sighed internally. This was going to be a long 7 hours. The case was heavy. It contained his high-frequency secure comms unit, a hardened laptop, and other tools. It was essential, and it was never, ever to be checked. He stepped onto the aircraft. A flight attendant named Chloe, bright and professional, greeted him. "Welcome aboard, sir." "Evening," Marcus said, his voice a low baritone. He found his seat, 2B, a spacious pod. He deftly slid his leather bag under the ottoman. The Pelican case, however, was a problem. It was too thick for the overhead bin, designed specifically to fit under his seat. He pushed it deep beneath his feet. He saw his target, Julian Finch, settle into 1A, directly in front of him and to the left. Perfect. A moment later, the Hedges arrived. 3A and 3B, Richard said to the attendant. "Right this way, ma'am," Chloe said, gesturing to the row directly behind Marcus. Caroline stopped dead in the aisle, staring at Marcus as he settled into his seat. She looked at the Pelican case by his feet, then back at his face. Her top lip curled in a faint, involuntary sneer. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice dripping with false civility. Marcus looked up. "Ma'am?" "That box, it's blocking the aisle." It wasn't. It was deep in his footwell. "It's stowed, ma'am," Marcus said flatly. "It doesn't look stowed. It looks dangerous." "Flight attendant," she snapped, clicking her fingers at Chloe. "This man's luggage is a hazard." Chloe hurried back. "Ma'am, the passenger's bag is fully under his own seat. It's not obstructing anything." "It's obstructing my sense of security," Caroline retorted. "What's in it? Why is it so heavy? It should be checked." "Ma'am, as long as it fits, the passenger is entitled to his carry-on," Chloe said politely, her smile strained. "This is ridiculous," Caroline muttered, shoving past and slumping into her seat. 3A. Marcus closed his eyes, took a breath, and began his pre-flight mental checklist. He had to ignore her. He had a job to do. But as the cabin door hissed shut and the plane began its slow taxi to the runway, he could feel her gaze burning a hole in the back of his headrest. The massive jetliner shuddered, its engines screaming as it ripped through the low-lying New York clouds. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin crew began their first-class service. "A glass of champagne, Mr. Thorne?" Chloe asked, her smile firmly back in place. "Just water. No ice, please." In 3A, Caroline Hedges watched this. No champagne? Her mind catalogued. Who turns down free champagne? She, on the other hand, had already downed her first glass and was holding it out for a refill. "Richard, he's just strange," she whispered. Her husband was already trying to open his laptop, clearly hoping to retreat into a spreadsheet. "Caroline, please. It's a long flight. Just read your magazine." "I can't. I have a bad feeling. He's been watching that older man in 1A. She wasn't wrong. Marcus was watching Julian Finch. Finch had his own laptop open, and Marcus was subtly trying to get a glimpse of the screen, looking for any last-minute communications. The file he was reviewing, the one he'd briefly glimpsed at the gate, was a final wire transfer authorization. The money was moving as they flew. To Caroline, this looked like stalking. Marcus declined the hot towel. He declined the roasted nuts. When the dinner service began, he declined the full meal. "Sir, you should really eat something," Chloe advised, concerned. "I'm fine, just the water. And if you could, please don't disturb me." He pulled out his secure phone. The screen was black to anyone not looking at it directly, a privacy filter. To Caroline, craning her neck, it looked like the phone was off, yet he was typing furiously on the dark screen. More evidence. He was texting in secret. An hour passed. The cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers were eating or watching movies. Marcus got up. He needed to stretch, but more importantly, he needed to get a better angle on Finch's screen. He walked to the galley at the front of the first-class cabin. He leaned against the bulkhead, feigning a leg stretch. From this vantage point, he could see Finch's screen clearly. The man was logged into a heavily encrypted web portal. Good. He was sticking to the plan. "Can I help you, sir?" A different flight attendant, Sarah, the lead purser, asked from the galley. "No, thank you. Just getting the blood flowing." He stood there for a full 2 minutes, staring, observing. In 3A, Caroline's heart was hammering. He was casing the cabin. He was looking at the cockpit door. He was monitoring the flight attendants. This was it. This was how it all started. She grabbed her husband's arm, her nails digging in. "Richard, he's planning something. I know it." "Caroline, my God, he's just standing there." "No, he's not. He's acting suspicious. He has that box. He won't eat. He's on his dark phone, and now he's guarding the cockpit." This was a complete and total fabrication, born of her own paranoia. But in her mind, it was the truth. Marcus returned to his seat. He sat for another hour, stock still. He wasn't asleep. He was listening. He had a sensitive audio receiver activated on his phone, pointed toward 1A, trying to catch any keywords if Finch made a call on the plane's SAT phone. To Caroline, this unnerving stillness was the most terrifying thing of all. He was waiting. Then, the moment of proof arrived. Julian Finch, having finished his meal and a movie, got up to use the first-class restroom at the front of the cabin. Marcus watched him go. This was his chance. He knew from his surveillance that Finch was paranoid and often travelled with multiple SIM cards, discarding them as he went. Marcus leaned forward, his arm snaked out, quick and practiced. He slipped his hand into the seatback pocket of 1A, the seat Finch had just vacated. He felt around. His fingers brushed against a small, plastic-wrapped object. Got it. He pulled his hand back, palming a tiny, discarded SIM card. He slipped it into his own pocket. The entire motion took less than 2 seconds, but 2 seconds was all Caroline Hedges needed. She gasped. It was a sharp, theatrical sound that made her own husband jump. "He's stealing!" she hissed. "Richard, he just went through that man's things. He stole his wallet." "What? Are you sure?" Richard looked up, alarmed. "I saw it with my own eyes. He waited for that man to leave, and then he robbed him." This was the final piece. The man wasn't just a terrorist. He was a common thief, preying on first-class passengers. This, she understood. This, she could act on. Her hand shot up and mashed the flight attendant call button. She didn't just press it, she hammered it. Bing, 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 bing. The sound echoing through the quiet, darkened cabin. Chloe, the attendant, was there in an instant. "Mrs. Hedges? Is everything all right?" Other passengers were looking around, their movies paused, their sleep disturbed. Marcus Thorne closed his eyes. The easy part of the mission was over. "No, it is not all right," Caroline said, her voice a piercing stage whisper, loud enough for everyone in the front cabin to hear. "That man, in 2B, she pointed a finger, trembling with self-righteousness, directly at Marcus. "That man is a threat. I just watched him steal from the passenger in 1A. The silence that followed Caroline's accusation was heavier than the plane itself. Every eye in the first-class cabin, and even some from the curtained-off premium economy, snapped to Marcus. Marcus sat perfectly still. He did not turn. He did not react. He simply opened his eyes and stared at the seatback in front of him. Inside his mind, a klaxon was blaring. Compromised. The mission is compromised. Chloe, the flight attendant, looked horrified. This was the worst-case scenario, a passenger-on-passenger accusation. "Ma'am, that's a very serious allegation," Chloe stammered, trying to keep her voice down. "It's not an allegation. I saw him." Caroline's voice rose, cracking the quiet. "The man in 1A went to the lavatory, and this person," she spat the word, "reached into his seat and took something. Probably his wallet or his passport." From the lavatory, the lock on the door clicked. Julian Finch, the actual criminal, stepped out, oblivious. He glanced at the small crowd gathered in the aisle, frowned, and squeezed past to his seat. "Ma'am, please," Chloe pleaded, her face flushed. "Let's discuss this in the galley." "No, I want everyone to hear. Check his pockets. He's a thief." Marcus Thorne finally turned. He moved slowly, deliberately. He looked past Chloe, past the gawk-eyed passenger in 2D, and settled his gaze on Caroline Hedges. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously calm. "Ma'am, you are mistaken, and you need to lower your voice." The sheer cold authority in his tone gave Caroline pause, but only for a second. She mistook his calmness for guilt. "Oh, I'm mistaken. I know what I saw," she sneered. "Richard, tell them. You saw it." Richard Hedges looked like he wanted to be swallowed by his seat. I wasn't watching, honey. I was working." "Useless," Caroline snapped, then turned her full-throated fury back to the crew. "What are you going to do about this? This man," she pointed again, "has been acting suspiciously since the gate. He's been staring at everyone. He's got that strange, heavy box, and now he's stealing. I don't feel safe." Sarah, the lead flight purser, arrived from the main galley, her face a mask of professional concern. "What seems to be the trouble here?" "This passenger in 3A is accusing the passenger in 2B of theft," Chloe reported, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah sized up the situation. She saw a wealthy, hysterical woman and a black man who looked as unbothered as if he were waiting for a bus. She had been trained for this. De-escalate. Separate. "Sir," she said to Marcus, her tone polite but firm, "I need to ask you to come with me to the forward galley so we can have a word." Marcus looked at Julian Finch in 1A, who was now pointedly putting on noise-cancelling headphones, trying to ignore the drama. Good, Marcus thought. Stay ignorant. He nodded once. Fine. He unbuckled, stood, and moved towards the galley. "That's right. Run and hide," Caroline called after him. "Mrs. Hedges," Sarah snapped, her patience finally breaking. "You will stay in your seat and be quiet, or I will have the captain authorize your restraint." This shocked Caroline into silence. Her mouth snapped shut, her eyes wide with indignation. Marcus stepped into the small, stainless steel galley. Chloe followed, as did Sarah, who pulled the curtain shut. It was a tiny, claustrophobic space. "Sir," Sarah began, crossing her arms, "I need to know what's going on. That passenger is insistent." "That passenger is mistaken," Marcus said. "I dropped my pen. It rolled under the seat. I was retrieving it." It was a weak lie, but the only one he could offer. "She said you reached into the seat-back pocket." "I was bracing myself. It was a quick movement. She's paranoid." "She also said," Sarah continued, her eyes narrowing, "that you've been acting suspicious this entire time, that you're watching the cabin, that you have a case you're protective of. Sir, in this day and age, you have to understand what that sounds like." Marcus felt a familiar, cold spike of anger, but he tamped it down. "What it sounds like, Mom, is profiling. What I am is a passenger trying to have a quiet flight. Now, if you're done..." He moved to leave. Sarah put a hand on his arm. "I'm not done. She's escalating. She's now telling her husband she thinks you're a A security threat. Marcus froze. This was the line. A simple theft accusation was a nuisance. A security threat at 35,000 feet was a mission-ending catastrophe. It meant grounding the plane. It meant law enforcement. It meant Julian Finch would be spooked, the network would scatter, and 18 months of work would evaporate. She's what? She's hysterical, Chloe chimed in, twisting a plastic cup in her hands. She used the word terrorist. She asked her husband if he thought you were a terrorist. From behind the curtain, they heard Caroline's voice, again, this time on the phone. She was using the plane's Wi-Fi to make a call. Yes, I'm on the plane. Transatlantic 117, she was saying, her voice loud and shaky. There's a man. I don't know. He's a threat. He's frightening me. You have to call the airline. You have to make them do something. Sarah's face went white. Is she calling 911? From the air? This was out of control. Okay, sir, Sarah said, her voice now steel. I don't know what's going on, but this is now a security incident. The captain has to be notified. We may have to divert the flight. No, Marcus said. The word was absolute. You will not divert this flight. I don't think you're in a position to tell me what to do, sir. She's accusing you of terrorism. Protocol is clear. I need to know what is in that Pelican case. Right now. Open it. I can't do that. Then I'm getting the captain. Fine, get the captain. But you tell him, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper, that if he diverts this plane, he will be obstructing a United States federal investigation. Sarah paused. What did you just say? From behind the curtain, Caroline Hedges had finished her call and ripped it open. She was standing there, her face blotchy with rage. He won't open the box, she shrieked, for the whole cabin to hear. It's a bomb. I know it. He's a terrorist. Do something. The cabin erupted. People were standing up, panicking. A woman in row 4 started to cry. This, Marcus said to Sarah, his eyes like ice, is what you've allowed to happen. He knew his hand was forced. His cover was blown. The only thing he could do now was control the fallout. Get the captain, Marcus ordered, and tell him to bring his SAT phone. He reached slowly into his jacket. Chloe flinched, her hand flying to her mouth. Caroline Hedges's eyes went wide, a sick, triumphant smile spreading on her face. He's got a weapon! He's reaching for a... Marcus didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a black, leather, bifold wallet. He flipped it open. On one side was his identification. On the other was a heavy, gold and enamel badge. Special Agent Marcus Thorne, he said, his voice cutting through the panic like a surgeon's blade. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now get your captain and shut her up. We have a real problem. The reveal of the badge acted like a sonic boom in the small galley. The panic, the accusations, the shrieking, it all just stopped. Chloe's jaw was on the floor. Sarah, the lead purser, stared at the credentials, her brain trying to process the Eagle, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the man standing in front of her. Caroline Hedges, who had been mid-shriek, choked on her own self-righteousness. Her eyes darted from the badge to Marcus's face. For a single second, she registered shock. Then, instantly, denial took its place. "That's fake," she scoffed, though her voice was a full octave higher. "That's a fake. You can buy those on the internet. Don't fall for it. He's a con man." Marcus never even looked at her. His entire focus was on Sarah, the only person who mattered. "Mum," he said, his voice tight. "You have a passenger who is inciting a riot, jeopardizing flight safety, and is now actively interfering with a federal operation. You need to control her. I need to speak to the captain. This is no longer a request. Sarah, trained for hijackings and emergencies, recognized the ring of absolute truth. The man's demeanor, his economy of motion, his unshakable calm in the face of her panic. This was not a terrorist. This was a professional. "Chloe," Sarah ordered, her voice firm. "Go to the cockpit. Inform Captain Andrews we have a Code Sierra, a federal officer on board, requiring his immediate attention. Quietly." Chloe nodded and disappeared. "You," Sarah said, pointing at Caroline. "Go back to your seat, now." "But now, Mrs. Hedges, or the next person you speak to will be the Port Authority police in handcuffs." Caroline's face crumpled. This was not how her hero fantasy was supposed to go. She looked at Marcus, her eyes narrowed with pure, unadulterated hatred. This was a humiliation she would not forget. She spun around and stomped back to 3A, yanking the curtain shut behind her. The galley was silent for a moment. "Agent Thorne," Sarah said, her voice now respectful. "My apologies. You understand the situation." "I understand," Marcus said. "I also understand that your passenger in 3A just compromised a multi-million-dollar international sting operation. But we're going to fix it." The cockpit door opened, and Chloe emerged, followed by a tall, silver-haired man with pilot's wings on his crisp white shirt. This was Captain Andrews. He had the weary, steady eyes of a man who had seen everything. "I'm Captain Andrews. Chloe says you have a situation, Agent." "Yes, sir," Marcus said, holding up his credentials again. "Special Agent Marcus Thorne, FBI. I have a live surveillance target in 1A, Julian Finch. He is a high-level money launderer. We are operating in conjunction with your own Metropolitan Police. He is to be arrested on landing at Heathrow." The captain absorbed this. "Go on. Your passenger in 3A, Caroline Hedges, has unfortunately blown my cover to the entire cabin, including, potentially, my target. But worse, she called someone on the ground and reported a security threat." The captain's face darkened. "She what?" "We'll be getting a call from air traffic control any second if she did. They'll order us to divert to the nearest airport. Gander, probably." "You can't do that, Captain. If we divert, Finch knows. He wipes his devices. The UK network scatters. The case is dead. Agent Thorne, I have 200 other passengers. My priority is the safety of this aircraft. I don't know you from Adam. The badge looks real, but as the lady said—" "I expected that," Marcus cut in. He pulled a laminated card from his wallet. "This is the 24-hour verification number for the Washington Field Office, and this is my direct supervisor, Assistant Director Harrison. Here is my FAG, Firearms Authorization Group, number. Use your SAT phone. The authorization code for this operation is Nightfall Omega. You will be patched through to Director Harrison. He will verify my status and the critical nature of this flight." The captain looked at the card. This was specific. This was real. "I'll be right back." He and Chloe went back into the cockpit. Sarah stayed with Marcus in the galley. "Agent Thorne," Sarah whispered. "What about the theft? What she said she saw?" Marcus reached into his pants pocket and pulled out the tiny, plastic-wrapped SIM card. "This. My target discarded it. It's evidence. I retrieved it. Your passenger in 3A interpreted retrieving evidence as stealing a wallet." Sarah's face was a study in dawning comprehension and absolute mortification. "Oh my God!" "Exactly." The minutes ticked by. They were agonizing. Marcus could feel the vibration of the engines, imagining the digital signals flying from the plane, bouncing off a satellite, and hitting a desk in Washington, D.C. He could also hear, from the cabin, the sound of quiet sobbing. It was Caroline Hedges, performing her victimhood for her husband. After what felt like an eternity, the cockpit door opened. Captain Andrews stepped out. His entire demeanor had changed. He was no longer a skeptical airline pilot. He was an ally. "Agent Thorne," he said, extending a hand. "I just got off the phone with Director Harrison. My apologies for the disturbance. The director was very clear about the importance of this mission, and he was very clear," he added, his eyes flashing with anger, "about the passenger in 3A. What's the word, Captain? My orders are to assist you in any way you require. We will not be diverting. I've already informed ATC that we had a hysterical passenger who made a false report and that the situation is contained. They weren't happy, but they stood down." "Good," Marcus breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. "Now," the captain said, "how do we handle this? Your target in 1A is wearing headphones, but he must have seen the commotion. He's a professional. He'll pretend to see nothing. He'll assume it was just a typical, unruly passenger incident. We let him believe that. The best thing we can do is return to normalcy." "And Mrs. Hedges?" Marcus's face hardened. "She needs to be neutralized. She's a liability." "I was hoping you'd say that," the captain said. He stepped past Marcus and ripped open the curtain to 3A. Caroline and Richard Hedges both jumped. Caroline had been in the middle of a tearful whisper. "Mrs. Hedges," the captain said, his voice booming with command. "I am Captain Andrews. I've just been on the phone with the US government." Caroline's eyes went wide. "Due to your reckless and false report, you have triggered a national security alert. You have endangered this aircraft, and you have interfered with a federal officer in the commission of his duties. That, ma'am, is a federal crime." Caroline's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "This is your one and only warning," the captain continued, his voice cold. "You will not speak to Agent Thorne. You will not look at Agent Thorne. You will not get out of this seat, except to use the lavatory for the remainder of this flight. If you so much as whisper the word terrorist again, I will have my crew restrain you to your seat, and you will be arrested by British authorities upon landing. Do you understand me?" Caroline Hedges, for the first time in what was likely her entire life, was utterly and completely silenced. She could only nod, her face a mask of pale, frozen terror. "Good," the captain said. He turned to Richard Hedges. "And you, sir? Control your wife." Richard, who looked like he was about to have a heart attack, nodded vigorously. "Yes, Captain. Absolutely. So sorry." The captain closed the curtain. He looked at Marcus. "Will that suffice, Agent?" "That will suffice, Captain. Thank you." "Good. Now, please, go catch your criminal." Marcus nodded. He stepped out of the galley. The entire first-class cabin was staring at him. He ignored them all, sat down in 2B, and buckled his seatbelt. The first layer of karma had been delivered. Caroline Hedges was humiliated, terrified, and trapped. But the story wasn't over. As Marcus settled in, his secure phone buzzed. It was a new file from his team at the WFO. The subject line read, "Nightfall, urgent co-conspirator file." He opened it. His team had been digging into the shell corporations Finch was using. They had just uncovered the name of a new, previously unknown associate, the person who had structured the final Cayman Islands getaway accounts. Marcus read the name on the file. Name, Richard Hedges. Firm, Hedges Capital Partners. Status, flight risk. Marcus Thorne's blood ran cold. He slowly lifted his eyes from his phone and looked through the gap in the seats. He wasn't looking at Caroline in 3A. He was looking at her husband, the quiet, apologetic man in 3B. Caroline Hedges hadn't just interrupted an investigation. She had, with her own prejudiced, hysterical panic, personally pointed a federal agent at her own husband, who was sitting one row away, trying to flee the country with her. The air in the cabin had returned to its pressurized hum, but for Marcus Thorne, the world had just tilted on its axis. He read the name again. Richard Hedges. It couldn't be a coincidence. The name, the flight, the first-class ticket to a non-extradition-friendly country's hub. This wasn't a vacation. This was a run. He looked over at 3B. Richard Hedges was no longer looking at his spreadsheet. His laptop was closed. He was sitting stiffly, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap, his knuckles were white. He was staring, unseeing, at the bulkhead. He was sweating. He knows, Marcus realized. He heard federal investigation. He saw the badge. He knows it's over. Marcus looked at Caroline. She was also sitting stiffly, but for entirely different reasons. She was radiating humiliation. Her arms were crossed, and she was alternately glaring at the floor and at the flight attendants, who were now pointedly ignoring her. She was a compressed coil of entitled rage, mentally drafting her lawsuits, completely oblivious to the real catastrophe that was sitting right next to her. The irony was so thick, Marcus could almost taste it. Caroline Hedges, in her bored, racist-fueled attempt to play hero, had just set fire to her own escape plan. If she had just read her magazine, as her husband begged her to, they might have made it. Richard would have slipped off the plane, disappeared into London, and been on a flight to the Caymans by morning. Finch would have been arrested, but Richard Hedges, this new, unknown co-conspirator, would have vanished. But she couldn't help herself. She had to make a scene. She had to center herself as the victim. And in doing so, she had put her husband's name, face, and seat number directly in front of the one man on Earth he was trying to escape. Marcus's mind went into overdrive. This was no longer a simple surveillance mission. It was now a dual-target capture. He discreetly opened his secure messaging app. His fingers flew across the dark screen. To WFO Harrison, from A. Thorne, Re-Nightfall, Omega 1, situation contained. Captain and crew are cooperative. 2. Target Finch, 1A, appears unaware. 3. Urgent development. Co-conspirator Hedges, Richard, is on board. Seat 3B. 4. Hedges is traveling with wife, Caroline Hedges. She is the passenger who initiated the incident. 5. Request Met Police. Expedite warrant for Hedges. Have them meet us at the gate. Require 2 detention teams, not 1. Team I for Finch. Team B for Hedges. 6. I need full surveillance on Mrs. Hedges as well. She is a material witness and potential flight risk herself. The message sent. A few seconds later, a reply to a throne from WFO Harrison. Nightfall Omega. 1. Copy. 2. My God, Agent, what a mess. 3. DOJ is ecstatic. They've been trying to flip Hedges for months. Warrant is already in motion. Met Police will be ready. 4. Proceed. And Thorne, try not to get into any more fights. Marcus permitted himself a small, grim smile. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Now, all he had to do was sit for 4 more hours. The flight droned on. The atmosphere in first class was like a funeral. No one spoke. The other passengers, having witnessed the drama, were pretending to sleep, casting nervous glances at Marcus and then at the fuming woman in 3A. The flight attendants were models of efficiency. They moved through the cabin, offering water, their faces betraying nothing. But they gave Marcus a wide berth, and they gave Caroline Hedges an even wider one. About an hour before landing, the pressure seemed to become too much for Richard Hedges. He unbuckled his seatbelt. Marcus's entire body tensed. What is he doing? Richard leaned over to his wife. He began to whisper, his voice urgent and panicked. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he could see the gestures. They were small, frantic. He was explaining. He was confessing. Caroline's face, which had been a mask of sullen anger, began to change. The anger drained away, replaced by a slack-jawed, horrifying confusion. Her skin went from blotchy red to a sickly, pale grey. She looked at her husband. She looked at his terrified, sweating face. And then she looked at Marcus. It wasn't a look of anger anymore. It was a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She finally understood. She was connecting the dots. The federal investigation, her husband's panic, the whispered confession. She realized in that moment that the man she had accused of being a terrorist wasn't there for some abstract threat. He was there. For them. Or at least, for the man she was married to. She saw Marcus watching her. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she let out a small, strangled sound, like a dying animal. Her husband, Richard, just slumped in his seat, his head in his hands, a broken man. He had just told her their life was over, and she knew, with a soul-crushing certainty, that it was all her fault. Caroline Hedges didn't cry. She was beyond tears. She just sat there, vibrating, as the realization of her catastrophic miscalculation settled over her. She hadn't just embarrassed herself. She hadn't just inconvenienced a federal agent. She had, in her moment of pique, Karen, personally thrown the match on her entire, carefully constructed, criminally funded life. Marcus Thorne simply turned his gaze back to the window, watching the dark clouds of the North Atlantic give way to the first lights of the Irish coast. The final hour of transatlantic flight 117 was the most agonizing a first-class cabin had ever endured. The air was so thick with tension, it felt like the pressurization system was failing. There was no more feigned sleep. Every passenger was awake, acutely aware that 3 people in their cabin were at the center of a silent, terrifying drama. In 1A, Julian Finch, the initial target, was blissfully unaware of the new development. He had ordered a post-meal brandy and was reading The Economist, the very picture of a placid, wealthy traveler. He remained Marcus's primary surveillance target, but he was no longer the most interesting. The real story was in row 3. Richard Hedges was visibly crumbling. He was no longer trying to hide his terror. He was pale, sweating, and seemed to be having trouble breathing. He kept loosening his collar, his eyes darting between Marcus and the fasten seatbelt sign, as if praying it would never come on. But the true spectacle was Caroline. The transformation was complete. The brittle, arrogant, self-important woman from the JFK terminal was gone. In her place was a ghost. Her face was a mask of waxy, pale shock. The self-righteous fury had been replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. She had not moved a muscle in over an hour. She was a statue of regret, frozen at the exact moment she realized her entire world had just been obliterated by her own hand. She understood. She knew her husband was a criminal. She knew they were fleeing, and she knew that her need to put a suspicious man in his place was the precise, singular reason they were now flying directly into a steel trap. Marcus Thorne felt no pity. He had spent the last 18 months tracing the money Richard Hedges and Julian Finch had stolen. He had read the victim impact statements. He knew about the 65-year-old teacher in Ohio, who was now working as a Walmart greeter because her pension had vanished. He knew about the retired firefighter in Pennsylvania who couldn't afford his heart medication. These people, the Hedges, with their cashmere travel suits and their disdain for anyone they deemed lesser, had built their lives on the ruins of others. And now, the bill was coming due. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and calm. "We are beginning our initial descent into London Heathrow. The weather is cool and clear with a light rain. We should be on the gate in approximately 30 minutes. Cabin crew, please prepare for landing." The bing of the seatbelt sign was like a gunshot in the silent cabin. Richard Hedges let out a small, desperate sound, a choked sob. Caroline flinched, as if she'd been physically struck. Marcus buckled his belt. He ran through the protocol in his head. "Let the Met board first. They will secure Finch and Hedges. My job is to observe, take possession of Finch's laptop and Hedges's briefcase, and then fade into the background. The UK team will handle the rest." The plane sank through the clouds. The green, rain-washed fields of England appeared below. The flaps groaned. The landing gear deployed with a heavy, final thud. Caroline Hedges's eyes squeezed shut. She was praying for the plane to crash. She was praying for a fire. She was praying for any act of God that would prevent what was about to happen. The wheels touched the runway with a gentle chirp. The jet engines roared into reverse thrust, pressing everyone into their seats. The plane slowed, rolling, and then turned off the main runway. It began the long, slow taxi to Terminal 3. Richard Hedges was openly weeping now, his face buried in his hands. Caroline stared at the back of Marcus's seat. Her breathing was shallow, a panicked rabbit palpitation. She could see the back of his head, unmoving. He was a statue of judgment. The black man she had tried to have arrested, the man she had accused and humiliated, was now revealed to be the silent arbiter of her fate. He hadn't just been suspicious, he had been a predator, and she, in her arrogance, had mistaken him for prey. The plane glided to a stop at the gate. The engines spooled down. Thump! The jet bridge connected. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow," the captain's voice said. "We ask that you remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until the sign has been turned off. For those passengers," he paused, "we will be waiting for just a moment for Port Authority to board. Please remain seated." The cabin, which should have been buzzing with the sound of unbuckling belts and retrieved luggage, was dead silent. Julian Finch, in 1A, finally looked up from his magazine, his face a mask of confusion. "Port Authority, what's this about?" Marcus just watched him. Then, the cabin door hissed open. It wasn't the ground crew, it was 4 men. They were not wearing airport uniforms. They were dressed in dark blue operational gear, with Metropolitan Police emblazoned in yellow on their chests. They were large, serious, and moved with a purpose that silenced the entire aircraft. The lead officer, a tall detective inspector, stepped into the first-class cabin, holding a small tablet. He paid no attention to Marcus. He walked directly to seat 1A. "Mr. Julian Finch?" the officer asked, his voice polite but unyielding. Finch's blood drained from his face. The economist slipped from his numb fingers. Yes. What is this?" "Julian Finch, I'm arresting you on behalf of the U.S. Department of Justice, pending an extradition warrant for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. Please stand." 2 of the officers efficiently pulled Finch from his seat, cuffed his hands behind his back, and began searching his pockets. "You do not have to say anything, but—" The voice faded as they moved him toward the jet bridge. It was happening. After 18 months, Marcus watched his target being led away. A clean, perfect capture. But the police weren't done. The detective inspector turned. He looked at his tablet, and then he looked at row 3. The other 2 officers moved with him, blocking the aisle. The cabin held its breath. The inspector's eyes settled on the pale, trembling man in 3B. "Mr. Richard Hedges?" Richard Hedges made a sound. It was a high-pitched, hopeless whine. "Richard Hedges," the inspector continued, I'm also arresting you on an extradition warrant for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. Please stand." "Oh, God," Richard whispered. "No. No, please." "Sir, please stand," the officer repeated, more firmly. As the officers reached for him, Caroline Hedges finally snapped. The frozen statue shattered, and the hysterical fury returned, but this time it was laced with pure, animal terror. "No!" she shrieked, launching herself sideways, trying to block the officers from her husband. "You can't take him. He's done nothing. It's a mistake." "Ma'am, step aside," the officer ordered. "You can't. He's my husband. This is that man's fault." Her finger shot out, shaking violently, pointing not at the police, not at her husband, but at Marcus Thorne, who was still seated, watching the scene unfold with quiet intensity. "He did this! He set us up!" she screamed. He's you!" The detective inspector looked at Marcus. Marcus simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The inspector understood. "Ma'am," the officer said to Caroline, his patience gone. "Your husband is under arrest. You are interfering with that arrest. Step aside, or you will be arrested for obstruction." What?" The officers simply moved past her, pulled Richard from his seat. He went limp, offering no resistance, and cuffed him. "Caroline!" Richard sobbed as they led him away. "Caroline. It's all true." That was it. The confession. The final nail. Caroline Hedges watched her husband, the source of her entire life, her wealth, her status, being led off the plane in handcuffs. She turned, her wild eyes landing on Marcus. You, she sputtered, advancing on him. "You animal! You set him up! This is entrapment! You targeted us!" Marcus Thorne finally unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up, towering over her in the aisle. He was calm. He was tired, but he was finished. He picked up his leather briefcase and his pelican case. "Mrs. Hedges," he said, his voice low and clear, cutting through her hysteria. "I didn't target you. I didn't even know who you were. I was here for Julian Finch. Your husband was a ghost, a co-conspirator we were still trying to identify." He took a step toward the aisle. She blocked him. You lie. You knew." "No, ma'am," Marcus said, his voice dropping. "I didn't. Not until you made me. You called me suspicious. You called me a thief. You called me a terrorist. You screamed, and you pointed, and you forced me to identify myself to the captain, which meant I had to inform my superiors of a passenger incident." He leaned in slightly. "My superiors, to ensure my safety, ran the passenger manifest, and your name, Hedges, set off an alarm. They ran your husband's file, and they found it. The link, the offshore accounts, the final piece of the puzzle. Your husband, Mrs. Hedges, was fleeing the country. He was on his way to a life in the Caymans, funded by the pensions of 1,000 innocent people. And he would have made it. He was standing right in front of her now. She was trapped between him and the seat. "If you had just," he said, his voice a quiet razor, "read your magazine, kept your mouth shut, and minded your own business, your criminal husband would be a free man right now. But you couldn't. You just had to see a suspicious black man in first class, and you just had to be the hero." He looked her dead in the eye. "You didn't just regret calling security, Mrs. Hedges. You called security, and in doing so, you personally, single-handedly, put your husband in federal prison for the rest of his life. You are his karma. You did this to him. You did this to yourself." Caroline Hedges's face was a wasteland. The truth, in its brutal, unvarnished form, had hit her. The horror was complete. She had been the instrument of her own destruction. She made a small, choking sound, and collapsed, half fainting, into her seat, 3A. Marcus Thorne looked at her for one more second. He felt nothing. He adjusted the strap of his briefcase on his shoulder. "Flight attendant," he said to a wide-eyed Chloe, who was watching from the galley. "She may need medical attention." He turned, and without a backward glance, walked off the plane, past the other stunned passengers, and into the terminal at Heathrow. His mission was complete. The jet bridge was cool and quiet. As Marcus stepped into the terminal, the detective inspector from the Met was waiting for him, along with another man in a suit. "Agent Thorne," the suit said. "Daniel Reed, Home Office. On behalf of Director Harrison and the U.S. government, nice work. Very dramatic." "It wasn't supposed to be," Marcus said, handing over his Pelican case. "The target's laptop and Finch's phone are with the arresting team. Hedges's briefcase is also secured. They're all yours." "Excellent. We'll take it from here," Reed said. "Finch is already in a transport. Hedges is being processed. He's already asking for a lawyer and talking about a deal. He'll flip on the Salviati network to save himself," Marcus nodded. "That was the goal." "Indeed. But the wife, Mrs. Hedges, she's a piece of work." "She is," Marcus agreed. "We're detaining her for questioning," Reed said. "We're running her financials right now. If she knew about her husband's activities, and our initial belief is that she was a very active participant in the spending. She'll be facing charges of her own. Conspiracy, accessory, receiving stolen property. The list will be long." "Good," Marcus said. "What you said to her on the plane," the detective inspector chimed in, a small, grim smile on his face. "My officer heard it. You are his karma. That was poetic, if you don't mind me saying." "It was just the truth," Marcus said. "She saw a threat, and she was right. She just misidentified it. It was her." As they spoke, a commotion came from the jet bridge. 2 paramedics were wheeling a gurney. On it was Caroline Hedges. She was not restrained. She was pale, her eyes wide and vacant, an oxygen mask over her face. She was in shock. She saw Marcus standing there, talking calmly with the British authorities. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of hatred and a horrifying, begging plea, locked with his. Marcus just held her gaze. He didn't smile. He didn't scowl. He just watched. He was a force of nature she had mistaken for a target. The paramedics wheeled her past toward a waiting ambulance. Her life as she knew it, the wealth, the privilege, the power to summon security on a whim, was over. She would spend the next decade in courtrooms, her assets frozen, her name a public disgrace, all because she couldn't stand the sight of a black man in first class. The hard karma wasn't just that she was embarrassed. It wasn't just that her husband was arrested. The hard karma was that her own prejudice was the weapon, her own mouth pulled the trigger, and her own life was the casualty. Marcus Thorne turned to Daniel Reed. "I need a secure line to Washington, and then I need a hotel room, and about 12 hours of sleep." "This way, Agent," Reed said, steering him toward a private diplomatic lounge. "I think you've earned it." Marcus walked away, leaving the chaos of Flight 117 behind him, just another man in a suit going to his next meeting. And just like that, it was over. Caroline Hedges didn't just have a bad flight. She had a life-ending one. Her husband, Richard, facing a mountain of evidence, turned state's witness and is now serving 15 years in federal prison. Julian Finch got 25, and Caroline, she lost everything. Her assets were seized, and she's facing her own charges for conspiracy. This isn't just a Karen story. It's a real-life story about how prejudice is a poison. Caroline Hedges was so convinced of her own superiority, so certain that a black man in a suit was suspicious, that she couldn't see the real criminal sitting right next to her. She thought she was calling security on him, but in reality, she was just calling them on herself. What do you think? Was this the most expensive "I'd like to speak to the manager" moment in history? Thank you for watching. If you were on the edge of your seat, hit that like button so we know you want more stories of drama and karma. Share this video with someone who needs to see what happens when you mess with the wrong person. And most importantly, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another story.